What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everybody's doing well out there. Today we're talking about quarterbacks and who should we start and sit for Week 6 fantasy football. Now, we're through 5 weeks of the NFL season. It feels like 15, right? Our teams a little bit beat up, having to make some super tough decisions, and now we got some studs on bye. What are we going to do here this week? It does hurt to lose Dak Prescott. Bye weeks also lost Drew Brees. Russell Wilson not available this week. What about Derek Carr possibly in some of those 2 quarterback leagues? Maybe you've been kind of riding the underdog here early on. Justin Herbert, another guy not going to be available this week. And we got some tough decisions to make. So before we get into all the Week 6 matchups, let's see how we did here in Week 5. And not a bad week at all for the quarterback position. I mean, we had 26 quarterbacks we gave a start or sit designation to that actually played this past week. And out of those 26 guys, 17 were correct for an accuracy percentage of 65%. Some of our biggest hits are Manscaped start of the week. Last week was Teddy Bridgewater. He went out and produced. Derek Carr, another solid game, continues to fly under the radar. Some misses, expected a little bit more from Joe Burrow, right? Yeah, he had a difficult matchup last week, but couldn't get anything going. Ryan Fitzpatrick went out and looked like, Joe Montana against the San Francisco 49ers last week and played great. Did he play that great, or did San Francisco just play that bad? That's the biggest question, but still, now we got to head into Week 6 because there's a lot of difficult matchups that we need to discuss here and figure out who can we trust and who can we not here in Week 6 fantasy football. All right, no Thursday night football games this week, so we're going to slide ourselves right into Sunday. And the first matchup we're talking about, Denver Broncos and New England Patriots. And I'm sure by now you've heard the news about Melvin Gordon, right? Arrested for speeding and a DUI. Does he play this week? We still don't know at the time of this recording, so make sure you stay tuned. We'll keep you up to date as soon as we find something out. But remember, this game was supposed to be played last week. It was moved to this week, and because of that, we get some starting quarterbacks back possibly, right? Drew Lock back at practice as of right now. Does he actually start this weekend? Something we need to pay attention to. If he's a full practice participant by Friday, more than likely he's going to play on Sunday. Does that mean that we throw him right into our starting lineup? No, probably not. I mean, going up against New England, they allow right around 19 fantasy points per game, which doesn't sound that bad, but don't forget, they got spanked by Russell Wilson just a few weeks ago, and the total number of points that he put up against this defense kind of skewed that number just a little bit. Plus, Bill Belichick had an extra week to prep for this game. I'm not jumping at the fact to start Drew Lock or Brett Rippon here in Week 6. But on the other side of the ball for the New England Patriots, Cam's back also, right? This delay of a week of this game allowed Cam Newton to come off the COVID list. He's been activated. He's back at practice. And that's great, right? Because he really, really helps the likes of one Julian Edelman, because at least we know they're going to throw the ball with some success in New England. Going up against Denver, who allows 21.7 fantasy points per game, which is 8th most in the NFL. I have no issues throwing Cam Newton back into my starting lineup. We know he's going to be involved somewhat in the running game. If he's inside the 5-yard line, Cam's going to call Cam's number. This isn't one of those slam dunk must starts of the week. However, Cam, fairly safe, and I'll put him in the start column here for Week 6. Texans and Titans up next, and apparently the time off that the Titans had really gave them a lot of added energy because they looked great in Week 5 going up against the Buffalo Bills, Ryan Tannehill included, with those 4 total touchdowns he had last week. Plus, he got A.J. Brown back. Jonnu Smith playing like one of the top tight ends in all of football, and now this week, he gets a better matchup going up against Houston, who allows over 18 fantasy points per game. I am a firm believer in momentum. The defense is playing well. The running game is producing. They're still producing in the passing game, and all of their weapons aren't even healthy right now. I have no issue starting Ryan Tannehill here this week. On the Texans side of things, Deshaun Watson coming off a pretty big game of his own, right? 359 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, but it was against Jacksonville. Tennessee is no pushover. They're only allowing 15 fantasy points per game, and we saw them give Josh Allen some fits last week. Also, Tennessee has at least 2 interceptions in 3 straight games. Watson has at least 1 interception in 4 of his 5 games so far this year. We could be looking at another one of those late game garbage point style things for Deshaun Watson, which I don't hate, right? Garbage points win fantasy matchups just as easy as blowout victories. I'm going to start Deshaun Watson, but I'm a little bit worried. The way that Tennessee is playing right now could give him a little bit of a fit and kind of limit that ceiling here in Week 6. Divisional matchup, Browns and Steelers now, and the Browns are 4-1. Y'all, that's not a typo. They're actually playing really well, But a crazy stat I saw was they share a division with the Ravens, Steelers, and Bengals, yet the Browns right now are the highest scoring team in that division. But Baker Mayfield's only quarterback 24 through 5 weeks of fantasy football. And why is that? Well, he hasn't thrown for more than 247 yards in a game, not being asked to run a whole lot and scramble, only 32 rushing yards on the season. However, he has thrown for 2 touchdowns a game for 4 straight weeks. He's really succeeding in this offense by being asked to do less. The running game, the running scheme in this offense is really opening up the passing game for it to be effective when they need it. Plus, Jarvis Landry, he's getting healthier and healthier every single week. Pittsburgh allows 19 fantasy points a game, and honestly, this week, I don't hate Baker. He's shown a pretty safe floor. He may not be that guy that wins your matchup for you, but he's a safe option, and I'll actually start him here in week 6. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, you got Big Ben. Did he find himself a new number 1 with Chase Claypool? Or was it just because Deontay Johnson was out with an injury, and maybe a lot of that should have gone towards Deontay Johnson? We were expecting a bigger game. Once he went out, Chase Claypool absolutely took over. But regardless, it doesn't really matter, right? There's enough options here for Big Ben to find success on a weekly basis with Claypool, Juju, Washington, Deontay Johnson, James Conner in the backfield. It doesn't matter. The Browns are giving up over 22 fantasy points per game, 7th most in the NFL, and I will fire up Big Ben here in week 6. Moving on to the Ravens and Eagles now, and Lamar Jackson's currently quarterback 11 in fantasy football, but he is averaging right around 20 fantasy points per game, so it's not like he's sucking. He's just not, elite 2019 Lamar. He's more like, Deshaun Watson average Lamar, which isn't a bad thing. Yes, you drafted him super early because you wanted that 35 points a game. I get it. But you're not going to get it as of right yet. For some reason, the Baltimore Ravens have just kind of changed their offensive scheme. And I look at the rushing totals, right? They're still running the ball a lot in Baltimore, but just not as much with Lamar Jackson. Last year, he averaged 80 rushing yards a game. This year, 47, almost half as much. You take away some of the opportunities, you limit the potential ceiling of Lamar Jackson. Now he has a matchup going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. They allow right around 18 fantasy points per game. So I expect similar numbers this week from what we've seen from Lamar in the past few weeks, right? Right around 20 fantasy points a game. It's not bad by any means. It's just not that super high ceiling. I just can't imagine you have multiple options on your team, one of which being better than Lamar Jackson on a weekly basis. If you have a Kyler Murray or something, I don't know why you do. But if you do, then yeah, okay, I get it. But otherwise, more than likely, you're starting Lamar Jackson. For Philadelphia, though, I just feel dirty starting Carson Wentz. Like, it just doesn't feel right? I mean, he's got 6 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. He's got a lack of weapons. They're all hurt like usual. Now he gets a matchup going up against the Baltimore Ravens. He's turning the ball over too much. The ceiling's too low. The lack of weapon, I just can't do it, right? I mean, I want him to keep giving the ball to Miles Sanders. That's what I want him to do. But until more of his weapons get available to him and healthy, until Zach Ertz looks like he wants to play football again, I'm probably going to have to sit Carson Wentz. Football team and Giants now, and is there a more high-profile quarterback matchup this week than Daniel Jones and Kyle Allen? Yeah, I didn't think so. I mean, this is going to be one of those epic showdowns, especially with the streak, right? I mean, Daniel Jones has got the streak going on. We got to cheer him on for the streak. He's got 4 straight weeks without a touchdown. Yeah, that just doesn't sound like somebody I want to start in fantasy football. He hasn't exceeded 250 yards passing since week 1. Yes, he's going up against the Washington football team who allows over 22 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, but I mean, I just can't trust him, right? I can't trust Daniel Jones at this point in fantasy football. On the football team side of things, I don't dislike Kyle Allen, right? But he is going up against the Giants who are underrated on the defensive side of things. They only allow 16.5 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, which is 6th fewest in the NFL. But they have faced the likes of Mitch Trubisky, Nick Mullins, Andy Dalton. So yeah, take those numbers for what they're worth. I can see Kyle Allen being kind of sneaky good this week. Does that mean that I have that warm fuzzy to throw him in my lineup and start him? No, it's still a huge risk. I think there's better options available to you this week than one Kyle Allen. However, don't be surprised if he surprises a few people here this week and puts up some pretty decent numbers against the Giants. On to the Falcons and Vikings now, and Matt Ryan is what you would call struggling just a little bit, right? But now he has a new head coach, no more Dan Quinn. Insert Raheem Morris. The last time you heard that name as a head coach in the NFL was 2011 with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But what Matt Ryan really needs is a healthy Julio Jones. They actually need to shake up this entire offense a little bit, get more targets the way of Hayden Hurst, more going the way of Russell Gage. We saw Calvin Ridley involved. We've heard the name Olamide Zaccheaus more than maybe any of us had imagined here in 2020. If they can get Julio Jones back healthy at some point and Todd Gurley can continue to perform on the ground, we'll see the numbers come back to normal for Matt Ryan. They are going against Minnesota, who does allow over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That's why I have him listed as a start. However, he's going to be one of my lowest ranked starting quarterbacks here this week. I don't have that confidence in him to go out there and put up a big number. In my opinion, this really depends on what other options you may have available to you here this week. I prefer to sit. I have him as a start, though, just because the matchup isn't that bad. Hopefully you can find maybe some better options on your waiver wire. Maybe you have another one on your bench. As for Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota Vikings, yes, please. I will definitely start Kirk Cousins this week going up against Atlanta because Atlanta's defense sucks. Yep, they allow over 30 fantasy points a game, most in the NFL, to opposing quarterbacks. Over the last 3, they've given up an average of 250 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, and only 1 interception over the past 3 weeks. Plus, now, maybe with an injury to Dalvin Cook, do we see more throwing? Do we see more Justin Jefferson? Maybe they include the tight ends and Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith Jr. a little bit more this week. Something to pay attention to. I got no issue starting Kirk Cousins against this defense, though, here this week. Lions and Jags up next, and could we see Minshew mania here this week? Possible, but he may be without one of his top targets in DJ Chark, who is questionable to play. Something we need to pay attention to here as the week progresses, because honestly, if he has him, Minshew's a pretty top option here in week 6. He's finished inside the top 15 quarterbacks 4 out of the last 5 weeks, and the only week that he didn't was week 3 when he had no DJ Chark. He's also thrown for 40-plus pass attempts in 4 straight games, has 10 touchdowns to only 4 interceptions here on the season, and now he gets a matchup going up against the Detroit Lions, who give up over 21 fantasy points per game, 9th most in the NFL, to opposing quarterbacks. Plus, Detroit has given up at least 240 yards passing and 2 touchdowns to every quarterback they have faced so far this season. You could do a lot worse than Gardner Minshew here in week 6. We hope that DJ Chark plays. That's what gives him that higher ceiling. If he's not there, slightly more risk. But if you're looking for an injury replacement or a bye week fill-in, I don't mind Gardner Minshew whatsoever. What about the Detroit Lions side of things? I mean, Stafford has basically been getting better every week of the season. If you look at his, fantasy football finishes here to start the season, to start off, finished 21st, then 19th, then 15th, then 9th, and now they're coming off the bye week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who allow over 22 fantasy points per game. I mean, come on. Phillip Rivers threw for 300 yards against this defense in Jacksonville. Stafford is going to be firmly seated in the start column for me here in week 6. Bengals and Colts up next, and speaking of Phillip Rivers, I mean, he just looks right? I mean, he hasn't thrown for 300 yards in a game since that week 1 matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars, has 4 touchdowns to 5 interceptions on the season, no true identity on the offensive side of the football, a super low ceiling on a weekly basis, and now a matchup against Cincinnati, who allows 17 fantasy points per game, 8th fewest to opposing quarterbacks in the NFL. I just don't see any consistency or upside to start Phillip Rivers here this week. For Joe Burrow, tough matchup last week against Baltimore also, right? 183 yards passing, no touchdown, 1 interception there for him last week. And it's not really a shock that we've seen his numbers take a slight dip the past couple weeks. Why is that? Less pass attempts, right? He's not out there throwing the ball 50 times a game because they're actually feeding Joe Mixon 25, 30 touches a game. That's going to lower the potential ceiling of Joe Burrow here again this week in a difficult matchup going up against Indianapolis. They only allow 12.5 fantasy points per game. That is number 1 in the NFL. This is just too risky of a start for me. I'm going to go ahead and sit Joe Burrow here in week 6. Bears and Panthers up next, and back-to-back quarterback 1 weeks for Teddy B, Teddy Bridgewater. He's actually averaging right around 20 fantasy points per game and playing a lot better than many had expected, myself included. But this is going to be the toughest matchup he's had in quite a while, going up against Chicago, who only allows 12.7 fantasy points per game, second best in the NFL, and they've played some tough competition. They've gone up against Tom Brady, Matt Ryan, Matthew Stafford, and so far here in 2020, they've yet to allow a quarterback to throw for 2 or more touchdowns against them. This is going to be one of those difficult matchups that really limits the ceiling of Teddy Bridgewater, and I prefer to sit him here in Week 6 if possible. It's not going to be much easier for Nick Foles, though, on the Chicago side of things. Carolina, they only allow 14 fantasy points per game, third fewest in the NFL. Now, Foles has seen some tough matchups here the past couple weeks, Tampa Bay and Indianapolis. And honestly, I kind of see similar numbers for him here this week, somewhat in that 13 to 16 fantasy point range. Not enough to absolutely kill your team, but not enough to help you win. Therefore, put him in the sit column. Jets and Dolphins, and don't nobody want to start Joe Flacco, right? I mean, this team was already short on weapons as it is, and then they cut Le'Veon Bell, arguably one of their best options. I mean, Adam Gase has just absolutely killed this team, and it's too bad, right? Because it's a matchup going up against Miami, who allows almost 20 fantasy points per game. But the last time I checked, Jamison Crowder can't go out there by himself and get 300 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns, which is what it would take for me to have to start Joe Flacco. I don't see it happening. Not going to start him here this week. As for Miami and Ryan Fitzpatrick, hells yeah. He's going to be my Manscaped start of the week. Absolutely love Ryan Fitzpatrick here this week. He's been 4 straight weeks now inside the top 12, 9 touchdowns to 2 interceptions in his last 4 games, and has thrown for over 300 yards 3 out of the last 4 weeks. The Jets, right now, allow just under 20 fantasy points per game, and every single team they've played has put up at least 27 points against them. It's Fitzmagic time, people. Throw him in your lineups. I love me some Ryan Fitzpatrick here in Week 6, and I'm looking forward to having him be my Manscaped start of the week. On to the battle of GB and TB, and as for Tampa Bay, they give up right around 15.5 fantasy points per game, 5th best in the NFL, but we've said it for weeks, maybe even months now at this point. Aaron Rodgers is on his Suck It tour to make people remember how good of a quarterback he is, and now he gets Devontae Adams back. I mean, the guy has already not thrown an interception on the season to 13 touchdowns, but it would not surprise me whatsoever to see a back-and-forth shootout between Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers here this week. No issue starting Aaron Rodgers. As for Tom Brady, going up against Green Bay, they allow almost 19 fantasy points per game, a middle-of-the-road defense, you could say, against opposing quarterbacks. But sounds like he could get Justin Watson and Chris Godwin back this week, and if that's the case, and the O-line can keep him upright, look for a shootout. I'll definitely start Tom Brady this week also. Rams and Niners, and holy hell, Jimmy. Dude pulled a full Nathan Peterman in Week 5 and absolutely sucked it up against the Miami Dolphins. He was pulled at halftime with them trailing 30-7. You have to believe that the ankle is still bothering him, and that was, part of the cause to that absolutely poor performance. Well, now they get a matchup against the Rams, who allow just about 17 fantasy points per game, 9th best in the NFL. But who's it going to be? Is it going to be Jimmy G? Is it going to be CJ Beathard? Who's going to have to contend with Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald? I mean, this is just not one of those matchups. It has too many question marks for me to trust either one of these options. I'm going to go ahead and sit Jimmy G or CJ Beathard, whoever it is, on Sunday. As for Jared Goff, he kind of is starting to work his way out of the WTF category, right? Because for a while there was no consistency. He would play well in difficult matchups and he'd suck it up in easy matchups, but he's starting to turn it around just a little bit. He has 3 touchdown passes now in 3 out of his last 4 weeks, and now he gets a matchup with San Francisco, who allows just about 20 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. He's got weapons now. He's got a great matchup. He's got a high ceiling. We're going to start Jared Goff here in Week 6. Time to move on to Monday Night Football, a doubleheader, right? And the first matchup is going to be the Kansas City Chiefs and Buffalo Bills. So we get Patrick Mahomes versus Josh Allen. It's going to be fun. There's no way you sit either one of these guys, right? They're both averaging just about 27 fantasy points per game. One is quarterback 2 and one is quarterback 3 in fantasy football right now. I could sit here and spit all kinds of stats and splits and tell you how good these guys are, but I mean, honestly, if you're contemplating sitting either one of these guys in Week 6 of fantasy football between all the injuries and bye weeks, why are you playing? You're starting both of these guys. And for the second game of that doubleheader, you got the Arizona Cardinals and Dallas Cowboys. And man, does it super suck to lose Dak Prescott the way that we did last week. That was nasty. But now it's Andy Dalton time, right? And I mean, this is the most weapons he's ever had at his disposal ever, right? I mean, the guy had to deal with Cincinnati for a long time. The situation in Dallas, 10 times better. He's got Michael Gallup, who he seems to absolutely love, Amari Cooper, and CeeDee Lamb is absolutely balling for a rookie wide receiver. Don't forget about Zeke Elliott in the backfield, and even though the Dallas Cowboys offensive line is way banged up, it's probably better than the majority of anything he ever had in Cincinnati, and now he gets a matchup against Arizona, allowing right around 18 fantasy points per game, but no Chandler Jones on the outside to pressure Andy Dalton. I don't hate Andy Dalton this week. I will actually start him this week because I think he's going to be able to find success in the passing game just like Dak Prescott did, right? This defense isn't going to be great in Dallas. It's going to force them to throw the ball all game long, and Andy Dalton is a very capable veteran to continue that here in Week 6. I'll start him. As for Kyler Murray, you never sit Kyler Murray. I mean, he does not have a game so far this season with less than 28 fantasy points, and Dallas allows over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. I mean, look, I'm looking for Kyler to run wild this week. Once again, we saw some big passing numbers from him last week. Don't be surprised if he can break off a big run and give you that high ceiling here in Week 6. All right, so those are my quarterback starts and sits here for Week 6 fantasy football. Hopefully that helped you make a few decisions. If not, don't worry. Our rankings video will be coming out later in the week to help you make even more difficult decisions if you still have any. But listen, we understand that we're not always going to agree on this channel. I mean, there's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions out there, and we enjoy hearing all of them, right? What we're trying to do is, as a community, come together and give the best possible information to the group of us so we can all succeed here in fantasy football. We get comments a lot of, oh, we're not sharing you with our league mates. So what it sounds like is we're all out there competing against other people, so why not go out and win championships all year long? That's what it's all about. We greatly appreciate the support out there. If you do me a favor, hit that like button and the subscribe button if you're looking for all things football content. You found your home. We greatly appreciate the support. Hopefully you guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you later.